Early spring bass fishing is truly the best time of year to catch some of the biggest bass of your life. Female bass are full of eggs and weigh the most that they will weigh all year. If you're a recreational angler, this is a great time of the year to catch your personal best.
New personal best! Oh my God!
If you are a tournament angler, this is a great time of the year to catch your biggest 5-fish limit. But if you don't know where to find these early spring giants, then it might just be another day of fishing and not a day of hog snatching. So in this video, we're going to talk about how to find these early spring bass with both traditional bass fishing methods as well as using live sonar. And I'm also going to tell you the #1 place that you can look on any body of water to find giant bass. So stay tuned. It's gonna be a good one. This video is brought to you by my apparel company, Finn Fishing. And at Finn Fishing, we just released a new product, the all-new duck hat. This is a waterproof, highly durable, lightweight hat. We know as fishermen, we put hats through abuse, whether that's in a storm or out in the sun. So I really wanted a highly durable hat that could withstand all the weather conditions. And right now, for the next few days, I'm going to be doing an introductory sale on these hats. So if you guys would like to help support the Bass Fishing HQ channel, click that link down below for Finn Fishing and check out the duck hats today. Now, when it comes to finding early spring bass, the first thing that we should really do is define what the early spring is, because depending on where you live in the country, this may hit you at different times throughout the year. Now, if you really think about spring, this can be broken up into 3 main phases that the bass go through: the pre-spawn, the spawn, and the post-spawn. When it comes to early spring fishing, we're really going to be talking about the pre-spawn. And to me, typically this is water temperatures between about 45 and 60 degrees. Now, I know that this sounds a little bit crazy, but in order for you to truly understand how to locate pre-spawn bass, one of the best things that you can think about is trying to find one of your buddies that is going on vacation at night. I know, it sounds crazy, but just bear with me for a minute. If I was trying to find one of my buddies who's headed to vacation at night, one of the first places that I'm going to check is his home. I'm gonna go over to his house. I'm gonna see if he's there. Now, when it comes to finding pre-spawn bass, one of the best things that you can do is try to go to where the bass have been living. And where the bass have been living are wintering areas. A lot of bass this time of the year are wanting to push up into shallow water. They are wanting to spawn. That is what they have on their mind. But until the water temps and the weather really stabilize, you can catch a lot of bass during the pre-spawn in wintering areas. Now, when it comes to finding bass in these wintering areas, one of the best things that you can do, and I think I heard this from Timmy Horton or Rick Clunn a number of years ago, is look for vertical structure or cover. Since I heard that, I have used this on so many different lakes and it seems to hold true. Whenever I get to a body of water and maybe that water temp's still in the 40-degree range, I am going to look for wintering areas. And what I'm mostly looking for is main lake structure that is immediately close to a main river channel of some sort, because where that structure goes right to that river channel, there is a big vertical break. Bass really like that vertical structure during this time of the year. So this may be a point that drops off into the river channel. This may be a hump that drops off into the river channel. What this also could be is a bluff. A bluff is basically a bank where the river channel hits right up against it. Again, you have very vertical structure. The bass will use this vertical structure to simply move up and down in the water column depending on the weather that you are having. Now, you may be saying that's great, but I don't have a lot of vertical structure in the body of water that I fish. And that's when I look for vertical cover. You know, one of the best pieces of vertical cover where bass will winter is standing timber. Again, this gives bass a place where they can go up and down in the water column while still kind of being close to something where they feel protected. Now, if you don't have vertical structure and you don't have vertical cover in your lakes, maybe you fish more natural lakes. And sometimes bigger natural lakes simply just have holes and they have depressions. These are great places where bass are going to winter. Now, if I went to my buddy's house and he wasn't at home, another thing that I could potentially do is just fly to his destination. I know at some point he is going to arrive at a certain destination. So I could just fly there and meet him when he gets there. The exact same thing we can do when it comes to fishing for bass. These fish are wanting to move up shallow. They are wanting to spawn. And a lot of times you can look at a map and you can mark spawning areas where these bass are going to be. And you can simply start fishing these spawning areas and more or less wait for the bass to arrive. Now, something that I have figured out over a number of years is that typically the first bass that get to these spawning areas are big ones. They are big females. And I don't know the exact reason behind this. I think it's a little bit like when my wife was pregnant. You know, like when she got to be into 8 months and nearly 9 months pregnant, she was ready. And a lot of female bass this time of the year, I think that they're just ready to spawn. They are ready to get this thing over with. They are fat, they are big, and they are just wanting to get these eggs out. And so I think that sometimes they are the first fish to move up into these spawning areas. Now, if you've been fishing for a little while, you probably know what some of the best spawning areas are on the lake that you fish. But if you don't know, there's really kind of 3 main components to a spawning area. You want to find hard bottom in shallow water in a very protected area. Bass need a hard bottom to lay their eggs on. They're not going to lay it in a silty bottom. They're not going to lay it in a muddy bottom. A lot of times this time of the year, if you pay attention to tournament fishing, you will see guys constantly sticking the pole into the water. And what they're doing is they're checking the bottom composition. They're trying to see, am I fishing around a hard bottom? Now, some of the best hard bottoms out there would be sand or would be gravel or any type of rock. These are areas where bass can lay their eggs, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a hard bottom. It can also be a hard piece of cover. For example, maybe you have a muddy bottom, but you have stumps. The bass will actually lay their eggs on those stumps. So you're really looking for either hard bottom or hard cover that a bass can lay their eggs on. Now, also, you're really looking in pretty shallow water this time of the year. Bass actually need sunlight to fertilize their eggs. So typically they're going to be in pretty shallow water. I think there's a lot of lakes across the country that you have about 2 foot, 3 foot, 4 foot of visibility. In a lot of those lakes, the bass are going to be spawning in about 5 foot in less water. Now, the clearer your body of water is, the deeper that light actually goes and the deeper your bass can spawn. I know buddies of mine who have fished up in New York and even in Michigan, where you have very clear water, where you can see down 20 foot, 25 foot, 30 foot, and they have caught spawning bass in 17, 18, 19 foot of water. But for the majority of lakes out there, you are looking for shallow water. Now, you may be looking at a lake and see a lot of hard bottom, a hard cover, and a lot of shallow water. So the next thing that you need to do in order to really kind of eliminate a ton of that water is find protected water. This is maybe the most important element of a good spawning ground, is having protected water. A bass does not want to lay its eggs just for those eggs to get swept away by wind or current or any other disturbance. So you really need to find protected water. Now, if you look at a lot of lakes across the country, one of the best areas where bass are going to spawn is around a marina. Marinas have huge break walls typically that break up the wind and the waves. And they also have a lot of hard bottom and shallow cover. So these marinas can be great places to locate bass that are spawning. Also, another place is simply in the back of a pocket, a cove, or the back of a bay. These are another really protected area where bass can spawn. Now, when it comes to pockets, one of the best things that you can find is a pocket that actually has quite a bit of twists and turns to it. If you have kind of a really traditional pocket, if the wind blows from one direction, it can blow right up the pipe and it can screw up the back of that pocket. But if you have these turns in the pocket, these little twists in the pocket, these are areas where bass are really protected by wind from all different directions, and these are great areas where you're going to find spawning bass. Another huge thing when it comes to finding spawning areas is simply look on the northern banks, the northern side. Typically, as the sun comes up, it's a little bit more on the southern side. So those northern banks will not only warm up, but they also have a lot more sunlight. And again, bass need sunlight in order to spawn. So one thing that I am constantly doing in the pre-spawn time frame is checking some of these spawning grounds, because you never know when you're going to get there right as the biggest bass in the lake are getting there, and you can catch them. Now, going back to our analogy, you've checked your buddy's home, he's not there. Maybe you've gone to the destination and you realize it's gonna be a little while before he gets there. The next best place that you can check out there is somewhere along his route. And the thing about it is that, again, your buddy is traveling at night, so you're not going to really be able to see him out there on the highway. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we talk about using live sonar. But really, the best place that you can find him next is at a gas station. A place where he can fuel up his car, fuel up himself, and keep on going. And guess what? The same thing is true in bass fishing. If you don't find them in their wintering areas and you don't find them in the spawning areas, they're typically going to be somewhere in between. And a lot of times those in-between areas are gas stations, but we call them in the bass fishing world staging areas. Now, the thing about a staging area is these type of areas typically will hold some of the biggest groups of bass that you will see during the pre-spawn. And just like a gas station, I mean, if you go to a Buc-ee's or a Speedway or a Sheetz at about 9 or 10 o'clock at night, there's a lot of people there. And same thing with bass. These staging areas are areas where the bass can fuel up, they can feed before they start the spawning process. Now, when it comes to locating these staging areas, they can kind of come in a lot of different forms. But one of the best things that I like to do is look for cover or structure that is related to a creek channel. The creek channel is really kind of like the highway. This is kind of the path that the bass is going to use to go from the wintering areas to the spawning grounds. And sometimes along the highway, you're going to find gas stations. You're going to find the staging areas. Sometimes the staging area can be a simple secondary point that kind of runs out and hits that creek channel. Sometimes it's just a piece of cover that is really close to that creek channel. Maybe a stump, maybe a rock pile, maybe a grass patch. And the other nice thing about a staging area is typically these are places where a lot of fish will congregate before they spawn, and these are places where bass are going to congregate after the spawn. So sometimes you can have fish that are coming and going to a certain place, just like your buddy going back and forth on vacation. Now, some of you out there may be like, well, that's great and all, but again, I don't have creek channels in my body of water. So maybe you fish a little bit more natural lakes, maybe a little bit more flatter with smaller, drops here and there. And this is where I really like to use Brandon Polinick's triangle theory. And his triangle theory is pretty simple. Basically, if you look at a map, you can kind of mark a couple places where you know the bass winter. You can also mark a place where you know that the bass spawn. And then you're simply going to draw a line in between these places, making a triangle. Now, this triangle really becomes the route in which bass are typically going to be found. So when I get to lakes that set up like this, I'm typically just going to draw it out on a map, and then I'm going to go back and forth in this triangle with my boat, and I'm trying to locate either a piece of cover or a slight structure change. Sometimes all it is a grass patch, a random grass patch that is in this triangle. These are places where, again, bass can hold before they go up to spawn, and bass can come back to after they spawn. Maybe it's a brush pile, maybe it's a stump, or sometimes it's very small structure changes. We talked a lot about a little bit more of major structure changes, points and humps, but sometimes in a more natural lake, you'll just have very small drops. Maybe just a teeny tiny drop within this triangle can be a place where bass are going to stage before they go up and spawn. Now, typically, if you have fish, the wintering areas, the spawning areas, and you check out some of those staging areas in between, you are going to locate bass somewhere along the way. But there is one place on every single body of water that I absolutely check if I see it on a map. If I see it on a map, I go there, and if they are there, you will find the biggest groups of bass you will ever see. Now, before I talk about that spot, which I consider to be the #1 spot, I want to quickly talk for a minute about fishing with live sonar during this time. Fishing with live scope or fishing with Mega Live is basically like trying to locate your buddy that we talked about, but do it during the day. If you are trying to locate your buddy during the daytime, what you can simply do is go on the highway as fast as you can, looking back and forth into every single car that you will see. You will eventually find the car that he is in. You will eventually find your buddy. Now, if you're using live sonar, you can basically do the same thing. You can go along the Bass Highway, looking back and forth over the creek channel, even in major gut areas, and you can actually find those bass somewhere along the way. But now that we talked about live scope, I want to talk quickly about the #1 place that you can find a bass. If you are going to a body of water and you see this on a map, just go there and check it, because there's a lot of bass that are in these areas. And the #1 area in the world during the pre-spawn is a pinch point. A pinch point is exactly what it sounds like. This is a spot between the wintering areas and the spawning areas that bass have to pass through. And usually this is a bridge, or sometimes it can be between maybe a couple of different pieces of land. Whatever it may be, these pinch points will really confine a ton of bass to a very small area. And whether you are using live scope or traditional fishing methods, these areas can hold a ton of bass. We have seen a number of Bassmaster Classics and other tournaments won throughout the year by guys finding these pinch points and catching a ton of bass that are feeding through the pinch points. Now, in this video, we didn't really talk a lot about different lures that you can use to catch bass during the pre-spawn. And the reason that I didn't talk about that is because I did a full video on the best early spring lures that I'm gonna leave linked right up here. So if you guys now understand where to find these bass, over here you can understand how to catch these bass once you find them. Hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one.